First of all, I'd like to thank the team at KMC Controls for giving me the opportunity to talk at the Genius Summit today. I'm really pleased to be here, appreciate the opportunity to share. I do want to apologize for the fact I'm not there in person. Intel is still limiting travel for some of our employees. And we do have representation there at the show with Mike Peterson. But we're trying to operate under a one riot, one ranger environment. So I think Mike is there to represent us. He understands what we're doing really well, and I appreciate him covering for me at the event. So let me dive into the presentation here that I'd like to share in welcoming you to the event, and also share a little perspective from Intel. One thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is digital transformation. I think one thing we've seen over the last year plus is that with the advent of COVID, the impact to running businesses, the inability for us to be on-prem, actually running the business day to day. Companies are moving, as our facility management and owners moving toward this concept we call digital transformation. Digital transformation, and I think Salesforce did an excellent job of describing what digital transformation is and keeping it really simple, is this idea of using digital technologies to create new or modify existing business processes, experience, and business capabilities within the business using digital technologies in order to enhance, improve, or in other means, revolutionize business practices. In effect, reimagining the business in the digital age. We believe at Intel that is really about deploying relevant services and experiences into these various business operations and enterprise level capabilities through data-centric, artificially intelligent, capable, compute continuum, networking, storage, and memory technologies that, together with an integrator ecosystem, allows us to address the needs of our constituent customers and end users as they look to apply technology to the spaces that they're currently operating within. From an Intel perspective, we were kind of happy to see, what the IoT analytics guys said about, where the market's going to move in the coming year. And this was about, where to invest for 2022. Where they started out was basically favorable for all of us here in the room, and probably on a worldwide basis is, especially in North America and Europe, we're going to see a substantial uptick in growth in both North America and Europe. And as such, that's good news for us here in the region, and to be leading that perspective of growth from IoT technology and IoT analytics is really exciting to us at Intel. Moreover, when you look at the technology requirements to support this, and I thought this was compelling, especially given the fact that we're here with KMC Controls and as a partner, is when you look at the requirements, and I want to step through these one by one, because I think when you look at the offering from KMC, from Intel and our partners, you see how relevant where we're going is and what we're doing with technology is, and supporting this technology view that IoT analytics has put forward. So, first of all, they're talking about cloud migration, and that's the cloudification of workloads and applications and the modernization of the services behind that. Again, when you look at Commander from KMC, when you look at the drive that Intel has together with our cloud service providers, we clearly see the value of cloud technology, not only off-prem, but on-prem. And we believe cloud technology is certainly a requirement going forward. When you look at the kind of capabilities that have been created by our friends at KMC Controls, wherein you now have things like Commander, which drive toward low-code or even no-code development interfaces, it speeds the deployment of technology into the market. And as with anything that's connected to a network today, if we can't make it cyber secure, then we run into issues, in trust and value with our end user space. And so not only has KMC Controls taken the steps, to move forward in the cybersecurity space, but they're working with another partner of Intel's Veridify, who I'm sure you'll hear from later in the show, around how we actually secure the building space, both built and new construction, in making sure that building technologies are secure from external threats. End-to-end solutions that are easy to configure and deploy clearly, an interesting comment by IoT Analytics. Again, the underpinning of a KMC Commander type solution enabled on Intel technologies. And by the way, those of other partners that are enabling building solutions are really working harder to deploy for our integrator partners and our solution partners things that are easy to deploy, easy to configure, preloaded with the tools you need in order to build these full end-to-end solutions that bring to life the experiences our owner operators are looking for. The fact that these things are API based and they're built on data capabilities from a broad range of data producing elements and technologies is a core of what we're doing across all of our solutions. But then again, something specifically you find within the Commander solution together with Intel. When we look at intelligent and connected edge, I mean, that's what a building is. It has to become intelligent. It's a standalone entity. It is an edge unto itself. And then within that are multiple edges. And so we fully agree with the idea that the intelligent and connected edge is a vital part of a solutions environment when deployed to our customers. Interestingly enough, and almost serendipitous to the event here that you guys are at the Genius Summit, sustainability is a big topic. And so we start getting into those issues of energy management, carbon footprint, health and wellness, all these different ideas that eventually drive us down the path of really looking at, how we're building sustainable and resilient facilities that become great places to work, live, play, or visit. And then the last thing is this whole idea around artificial intelligence and the fact that we're using tools like Commander and layered applications and tools on top of that allow us to drive these all new sort of compelling experiences for our customers. The really exciting part of this is that it's pervasive. It's obvious when you look at the list here that it doesn't matter what the facility is meant to do, there's going to be opportunities across the board. And when we look at pharma, energy, and utilities, which by the way, directly speaks to the built space, food and beverage, which is, clearly retail. We start looking at cities. You can't create a city without buildings. Construction, they all fit right into the areas where we as a partner base between the attendees here at the Genius Summit, Intel and KMC, this is right in the wheelhouse of every facility we touch, every place we go. These types of technologies are going to be deployed. And again, we're speaking directly to the opportunities that are created through the offerings that are being made available to you by our partners and KMC Controls. When we look at these opportunities from an Intel perspective, really what we're doing is we're trying to look at the needs of the company or the business holistically. We really want to look at all aspects of their opportunity to consider consuming technologies in order to create this digitally transformed environment. As such, we, Intel, always start sort of at our information technology history and underpinning and where we come from as a company. But increasingly, what's really important is that we start marrying together the operational technology assets with information technology capabilities in order to really address the customer's digital transformation of their processes, how they run their business, manufacturing, supply chain, all things inbound and outbound of the company, how they manage their facilities. And again, coming back to that idea of great places to live, work, play, and visit, it's critical as we go forward to not only automate processes, but also to automate facilities. And then how how people experience these automation capabilities built on operational and information technology day in and day out, again, coming back to those great places to live, work, or play. And then when we look at the products and services our companies are building, we're trying to help them not only build new, compelling, digitally enabled services and products, but what we're also trying to do is when they direct services internal to the organization, that those are also digitally enabled and connected to the infrastructure of the business. So what we're really trying to do across this entire set of domains is build an enterprise smart infrastructure that is deploying and allowing the customer to build managed services that really meet the needs of the enterprise, not only to drive top line and bottom line benefit, but also to be operationally efficient and to return, great benefits to the business. At the end of the day, when we start looking at this from an owner operator standpoint, we believe there's a handful of really clear experiences that we're being asked to support with our customers and with our constituents as we address the smart building and the smart infrastructure space. What the owner operators are telling us is that they really want to focus on the experiences. They want our help in making technology seamlessly integratable into their business. And now you come back to those ideas from the IoT analytics discussion where they were talking about easy to configure, easy to deploy, built on these technology elements that allow them to bring the experiences to life and enable these strong ideas around sustainability. So what we see is several big areas of opportunity. How do we help facilities become energy neutral? Again, the term around net zero energy. We think more than ever the deployment of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and computing and networking technology together with security allows us to actually start focusing on these ideas around net zero energy. Of course, the next area after that is net zero carbon. How do we reduce the carbon footprint and become, environmentally compatible with our built space and start addressing the needs, around sustainability for carbon neutrality. More and more, we're seeing the government and owner operators are really concerned about the cybersecurity of their facilities, and so this is an area where Intel is focused. It's where we're building deep partnerships, and I think what you'll see through the show and the event while you're there is that KMC Controls, together with partners like Veridify, are focused on addressing the cybersecurity needs of the business. And when we deploy all these digital technologies, we don't create a threat network that in its instantiation creates potential problems for our users and for the tenants in potentially creating unsafe circumstances. The next area is that it's physically secure. It's these two things actually get combined, cybersecurity and physical security. And so when we look at the video surveillance, the safe distancing, the social distancing, if you will, we start looking at, the means of access control and all the other things that we're trying to do within the building, and then securing those physical assets, not only from physical potential issues, but also from cyber issues. So the combination of cyber and physical security we see as two key elements that are being asked for by the owner operators. And then the last thing is around health and safety. When we start looking at building healthy and safe environments, our partners, our customers, and these owner operators are expecting that, we do have, clean water. We do provide a comfortable environment, that lighting and air quality are all maintained in a way that is a safe return from the COVID experience, and particularly a safe return to these facilities. So, we look at these basically as that tenant experience that we're trying to deploy. And at the end of the day, we're trying to organize our technology in light of what IoT analytics said and this sort of multi-purpose processes, premises, people, and products approach driving for this infrastructure platform that allows these experiences to be deployed. We're working with partners like KMC Controls, and you'll hear from another partner of ours later on in the event, with Jason Lund and Jones Lang LaSalle, and how they, as a property management company, are looking at deploying these experiences from their technology footing. And then obviously a critical partner of ours and KMC's is Veridify, which is helping us with the cyber and physical security aspects, of the facility. So I think, we appreciate the opportunity to participate with KMC in the event. Again, I apologize for not being able to be there personally. But we believe that this is a massive opportunity, a great future around smart building technology and safe, healthy, secure, sustainable facilities, together with the integrator community that sits in this room. So we look forward to further collaborations and the opportunity to work and meet with you all down the road in driving both of our success in this particular market and market opportunity. So thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate it. And I look forward to future engagements with all of you.
I think it's rare for a company like KMC or a small company like we have to have depth in a relationship with a company like Intel. Obviously, they're a big company, massive company. But Rick has really been an ambassador and a stable connection for us to them. So he's just been an amazing conduit for us to integrate with Intel, learn from them, and just a big thanks to Rick for doing that. Even though he's not here, I guess we should probably still applaud. I think he's all set here. So Peter's gonna give the keynote today. I'm not gonna spoil it by trying to tell you what I think he's going to do, but his credentials speak for himself. So Peter's got a consulting group called Carrican Group, and they have a no short list of customers, including Apple, Chick-fil-A, De Beers, AT&T, and really just helping people navigate change and inspiring companies to take opportunities, grow their business. He's written 7 books, so I think he probably knows what he's talking about. But I'll let him do the talking because I'm not very good at it. So I'll take this last opportunity to say thank you guys for coming out, and take it away, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. Cheers, mate. Good morning. So, firstly, it's great to be in person. I think I was meant to do this about this time last year, but it's good to see you face to face. When you show up at an event like this, the first thing you like to do, or I like to do as a speaker, is check if I'm kind of amongst my people, right? And I got here pretty late last night. You guys were shutting down the bar. I got into the elevator. At least 3 of you were bringing your cocktails with you into the elevator, and I'm an Australian, so that's about, it felt like a pretty good match for my cultural background. But as soon as I heard "pick that scab" from the stage this morning, and I'm like, this really might be my kind of audience where I am right now, right? Look, I spend my life working with organizations that are facing pretty substantial change and disruption. And I work with their executive teams on how do you find opportunity in that change and disruption. And it really means that I find myself in one or two camps. One, a camp like you're in, which is a really strong foundation, business is going great, and the question just is how much more gravy do you want to take in terms of the opportunity that's out there? Or business is really challenged right now, and in fact, some external disruptor is substantially threatening who we are. Guys, can we turn my mic down? Is the gentleman at the back down? He's not even here. All right. It's a bit loud. We'll be right. I'll try and speak a little bit more softly, if that's all right. September 2017, I was invited to a emergency strategic meeting with a CPG company and the 5 largest grocery retailers here in America. And the reason it was an emergency strategic meeting is because those 5 retailers, all of which you would know the names and the brands of, large publicly listed companies, had lost 30% of their market value in 45 days. I want you to imagine that, 30% of your market value in 45 days. Does anyone remember what happened in 2017 that led to the mass destruction of enterprise value in the grocery industry in America. Does anyone want to take a wild guess what happened in 2017? Amazon bought Whole Foods, right? This, by the way, is what that looks like in a share chart. Did you know only a couple of those companies have only just recovered the lost value from that experience in like the last few months as a result of COVID driving huge local retail consumption, et cetera. It's a bit of a bloodbath, really, right? Anyway, we have a whole day, and we're having a conversation about change, disruption, what it means, blah, blah, blah. I get to the end of the day, I say to the CMO of a $60 billion company, what is your conclusion about what happened? And she says, all I know is that you can't hold us responsible because we never saw it coming. And I'm like, were you smoking crack? Or what do you mean you never saw it coming? Are you outside of your... I didn't say any of those things, by the way. What I actually said was, wow, that's a really interesting perspective, because I want to get invited back to next year's emergency strategic meeting. And by the way, next Wednesday, that's exactly where I'm going to be, right? Anyway, back to the story. I'm like, okay, fine, and I'm on my way to the airport, and it's just bugging me that someone who's like, I mean, these people get paid big bucks to run these divisions of these companies, and I'm like, what do you mean we can't hold you responsible? You know what's interesting? If you steal a car in America, you go to jail. You wipe $21 billion of value off a company, and you get to have an emergency strategic meeting with me. There's something wrong with that disincentive, wouldn't you say, right? So I text one of my analysts in my Denver office, and I'm like, hey, John, I know you got a bunch of client responsibilities. I'm going to delegate everything on your table right now to somebody else on the team, and I want you to spend the next 12 weeks obsessed with one thing, and it's to study the dynamics of that business and tell me if that's a reasonable executive response. I said it shouldn't take you 12 weeks, but it'll probably take you 8 to 10. 13 minutes later, seriously, my phone starts blowing up. I get a series of text messages. I put them on a slide for you. Text number 1, 2016, Amazon released the wickedly primed food brand. That's a version of vertical integration, probably a hint they're taking food pretty seriously. That same year, they launched their Amazon Go grocery store, literally a store in Seattle with near-field communications technology, allowing people to buy stuff and check out without interacting with a human. They've announced 2,000 to 3,000 more of those. In fact, you might have seen they now expanded their vision to a potential department store-like version of that, right? 2015, the GMA. That'd be like the MCA or the MSCA or whatever your sort of industry body would be, runs a headline saying, don't freak out, but Amazon are coming and they're coming soon. You could go 10 years before the transaction, where they launched their fresh business, and they've been expanded. By the way, they're in, the Amazon Fresh business is a direct-to-consumer fresh grocery business. It's in 35 US states by the time they buy Whole Foods. Anyone here invested in the Amazon stock, just out of interest? Okay. If you've read any of the analyst briefings on the Amazon stock in the last 10 years since they started doing fresh, every briefing, every year says the exact same thing. If Amazon can solve their last mile challenge, they'll be unstoppable. Question, when you're a $1 trillion company, how do you solve your last mile challenge? Buy anyone you want. In case 10 years wasn't enough notice, you could go the year before where they start seriously selling food on the platform. But just in case that's not enough notice, you could go 18 years before where they buy 35% of an online grocery company. Would it be fair to say there was some signal in the noise, yes or no? 13 minutes it took my analyst to pull that briefing. But don't hold me responsible, I never saw it coming. For 20 years, we've been doing this work, and the difference between companies that thrive in the face of change and disruption from those that basically get their margins destroyed or worse doesn't come down to whether they have access to the right insights or knowledge about what's happening in the market and what's changing. In fact, our research tells us that nothing changes an industry that nobody predicts, with the exception of the occasional black swan, like a global pandemic. But if you actually distill what happened with the global pandemic, it just accelerated and amplified a bunch of existing trends that are already underway. Would that be a fair statement, yes or no? And you hear CEOs say, well, basically it took our 5-year journey and made it happen in 6 weeks. So nothing changes an industry that nobody predicted. So access to insight is not the issue. Access to capital is not the issue either. In fact, turns out we're happy to just print as much capital as we like and flood the economy with liquidity, and we wonder why we can't buy a car right now, right? That's not actually why, it's more to do with chip manufacturing. But the point I'm getting at is access to capital is not a problem either. I mean, we're flush with cash, have been for decades. So what separates those different organizations, those that do well from those that don't? Well, here's the basic insight. Companies don't transform, leaders do. Now, I use the word transform, and I'm going to use it a lot today, because basically the key to thriving in a changing environment is to be able to change at least as quickly internally as the external environment is changing, because if you don't, you're essentially becoming less relevant. We'll come back to that as a statement in a little while. But that transformation is the kind of the playbook, right? And it's not the company that's difficult to transform, it's the psychology of the people that run them. And there's basically 3 shifts that we have noticed that have to take place if you're going to basically move at least as fast as, if not faster than, that external environment. And the first shift is this. Number 1, and this is the hardest one. You have to take the change you're aware of and accept it as your new reality. Now that sounds ridiculous, right? Except the majority of leadership teams are stuck in awareness, have not truly accepted the reality, which robs them of the chance to really take ownership for leading the change. 2, they tend to wait until the external environment makes them change, but the really good companies get just ahead of it. They front run the market and lead their customer to the future. And they put tension on their own system from a place of ambition rather than from a place of crisis. Does that make sense? And then the third thing they do is they don't confuse the agreement of their team and of their partners in the ecosystem. Agreement being like, you ever sat around a table, talked about how the business needs to evolve and what you want from your team, and they all nod their head, yeah, that totally makes sense. Then 90 days later you look back and no one's done anything differently despite nodding their head in vehement agreement on the day, because agreement does not equal alignment. Alignment is when people make new decisions, invest their time in new ways, and invest their capital in new ways. If those 3 things aren't happening, there is no change without those 3 things. So let's unpack these, right? Let's do this first one, right? This concept of taking ownership. How do you move from awareness of change to acceptance of change? The basic insight is this, that this psychological leap is the hardest of all. That it's harder for a leader to move from awareness to acceptance, which I define as there and taking ownership, than it is to move from that into action. I'll give an example. Companies, we look at companies' transformations. We're like, wow, it took 8, 10 years. Almost never did. It doesn't take 8 years. It takes 6 years for them to make their mind up that they have to, and then 2 years to do the dirty work. Does that make sense? Think about the concept of recurring revenue models and as a service and subscription in your space. This is not a brand new conversation. And yet, just starting to really get serious about what that represents and the opportunity that's there. So let's actually talk about this industry. I decided, we've been keeping it safe and at a distance so far. We laugh at don't blame me, I never saw it coming. What I didn't tell you is I'm going to go after you. No, I'm kidding, I'm not really. Maybe a little bit. Here is my super simple, outside kind of non-expert view of what's likely happening in your world. Number 1, obviously, really interesting changes in use patterns of buildings and facilities, and no one's kind of fully sure how it's all going to play out. I'd say that's a pretty substantial shift. I put in macro the concept of a cyber risk, because it's every industry, every sector, every government, it's geopolitical, all the way down to how well you protect a facility. So we're seeing that clearly, been around for a while. Regulation influencing demand in your industry, depends what they're going to care about, depends what people are going to care about. Labor and talent shortages. I like to say that the war for talent is over. Talent won. And we are now being forced to treat employees like customers, positions, and all the things that sit around that. By the way, you should see how comfortable some of you are. Like, it's just like, oh, when I was doing a job, I was lucky to have a job. I walked 17 miles, no shoes, uphill both ways to work, right? Like, hey, and loved every minute. But isn't that true? This is not my topic for today, but we could have a lot of fun around the labor one. Lots of M&A, bunch of sophisticated capital. This has been happening for a decade plus in your industry. And usually that drives 1 or 2 things, either sends people price or sends them into a niche-based environment. New business models, subscription, revenue. And by the way, the more you're into the new business models, the higher the enterprise value seems to be in terms of what people value in the market. Lots of innovation. I would provoke you to say that we've under-leveraged innovation. I feel like we're waiting for building owners to take us into the future, where there is, I think, a primed opportunity as a result of COVID to take them into the future, because we know more what's possible than they know what's possible. And then you have our end customers, maybe the building user or the owner. Health and wellness, obviously being a huge issue, has been for a while. Air quality, going to be massive moving forward. Sustainability, you saw Rick's remarks. I mean, 4 of his 5 things were sustainability-related ideas. Cost always matters, and ease of use and mobility and all the sorts of things we want in terms of a user experience. Now, pause. Anything on that, okay, with the exception of changing use patterns, right? Is there anything on that board that's news to you, like post-COVID? I mean, this has all been happening a while. Would that be a fair statement? I've met some of you guys in your industry conferences. We've had this conversation before. Second question. Do you think any of them are going to slow down in terms of the level of demand, expectation, and adoption in the next 5 to 10 years? Can you see any of them going away? Can you see people no longer caring about sustainability, for instance, 3 to 5? Okay, so when I'm lucky enough to get invited back in 5 years, don't tell me you never saw it coming. And that's the basic observation, is there's nothing new that changes an industry and creates opportunity. What happens is we change our view and our willingness to accept that reality. Now, I think the biggest challenge you're going to have is there's not enough pain to make you do that, and we'll get to that as a conversation in a minute. But let me ask you one more question. So if none of these are going away and all of them are speeding up, what does that mean for the rate of change? That means we've probably just experienced the slowest rate of change we will ever experience for the rest of our professional lives. Because digitization begets more digitization. Once you get certain expectations of the customer experience in one industry and one sort of channel, you're going to expect it in all industries and all channels, which is kind of confronting when you think about the comment I made a little while ago, which is that quote, by the way, I used. If the rate of change outside of the organization is faster than the rate of change within, then the end is near. That's the actual quote. Does anyone remember who said that? Jeff Immelt, when he took the job from Jack Welch to run GE. How ironic. Isn't that the perfect example of awareness versus true acceptance, though? Like totally owning up to the fact that it's happening and aware of it, but not really owning the level of transformation required to remain competitive in response to it. This psychological leap is the biggest one, because the business models are already proven out there. The technology is already in use. We're not making this stuff up. Like all the things we need to lead that customer to the future is right here in front of us. The first leap will just be accept that reality. And by the way, it's not negative. Too often when we present sort of conversations around disruption, and so it's this bad thing that's happening to us. I would provoke you to say this might be the best thing that's ever happened to the industry, and our ability to not have to win business every year, to have like high margin, low labor, subscription revenue. I mean, the opportunity is incredible in front of your businesses right now. So disruption ain't bad. I would say this disruption's happening for you, not to you. And it's going to be good for the environment and good for the user and good for the health of the people that are in the space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here is a question. What keeps people stuck in awareness, do you think? What keeps us like stuck in this space where we're aware of what's happening, we're not really doing what we could about it? I'd say there's 3 things. Number 1, is that every time we talk about change, we create a dopamine response in the brain, which basically is the biochemical equivalent of feeling like you did something about it. But really, you haven't, just had a conversation. The second thing is what we call circular conversations, where you find yourself at work in the same conversation over and over and over again, and you're sort of sitting there going, I feel like we've been talking about this thing for years. Anyone had that experience before? You know, every time we do our strategic planning, we put this new business model, or this new idea, or this new revenue thing, or this new, and it's just like 3, 4, 5 years, and eventually you either have to just take it off and accept that you're not going to do anything with it, or actually execute hard against it, right? The third, and this is the most dangerous, this is what I want you to think about, is that we're fully aware, we're prepared to accept the reality, but we don't believe it's going to get legs, or we don't believe the technology is going to have fast uptake, or we don't think it's going to be able to deliver on its value. And we make assumptions like, oh, that's great, but our building owners only care about cost. They would never invest ahead of the curve. Oh, that would never work because we're always in an RFP process, and RFP processes are driven entirely by predefined attributes. And have you ever felt or heard people sort of say things? That is an assumption. It's where you basically project a belief and a bias onto an opportunity. And the problem is that assumption, we call that an assumption. The problem is that that assumption, that belief, that bias is built on what? It's built on your collective what? Experience. Everything you've known up until this date. But the problem with that is you're perfectly optimized for a world as it used to exist. That's the challenge, is that our knowledge and experience creates an incredible set of understandings and rubrics and maps of the world, but maps of the world as it was. And if you really think about industries and how they change from a place of imagination. They change when a converging set of technologies come together to create an emerging new set of possibilities. It's a whole different way of thinking. And so we have to get good at questioning our assumptions, because there is a fine line between experience and baggage. So here's my question. I'm going to get you to connect on your tables here for 3 or 4 minutes. Going to do this real quick, all right? Yes, you're going to have to do a little bit of work this morning. Yes, I saw you in the bar, so I'm going to make it 2 to 3 minutes. It's all right. But I'd like you to have a little chat with just the person next to you at your table, and if you're in uneven numbers, group of 3's fine. What are the couple of things that have changed? Really, if you were willing to get honest, have legitimately shifted in the industry that ideally represent a couple of opportunities for you and your business that maybe you're not fully realizing right now. Does that make sense as a question? What are you aware of that we really have the opportunity to just go, that's it, this is happening, it's on. That represent a couple of opportunities for you, your business, and how you're growing. Just take 2 or 3 minutes, quick chat, go. And then I'll hear a couple of answers. Clearly 3 minutes is not enough to have that conversation, I understand that, but we're just trying to begin the dialogue. I would like to hear from maybe 2 people who sort of put their finger on something and had a pretty interesting conversation about it at their table. Anyone want to be my first volunteer? Anyone got an idea to share from their conversation? I mean, you can also just leave me in the uncomfortable silence as well. Brilliant. Just going to give you the mic just so everyone can hear.
We talked a bit about how, just like KMC has really been pushing the digital services component today, and a lot of what we're talking about here is that we see with a lot of larger, and I won't name them, but there's a lot of larger, what are kind of considered MSIs or large system integrator companies that are going around and trying to absorb a lot of smaller successful companies, and they're utilizing digital services now to kind of try and take over those businesses and then leverage those services to be able to do more with less people.
Yep.
And really that, you can either kind of be the Blockbuster or you can be the Netflix, where you stay in the past with what was working because the technology wasn't there. Or you recognize that technology is developing at such a rapid clip that you no longer have to wait 3 hours for that movie to download. It's instantaneous. And so if that's the value now, you really have to be able to pivot over towards leveraging those things yourself.
It's a perfect example. So one, you can say, this is not okay, it shouldn't happen. Well, it doesn't care that you think that. It's just when the future meets the past, the future wins 6 days a week and twice on a Sunday, right? And what's interesting is the comment you made around the technology now works, quote unquote. When you study the sort of disruption and how it impacts an industry, there's a couple of things you learn. I told you one of them. Nothing changes an industry that nobody predicts. The second thing you learn is that change is actually really slow until it's not. Does that make sense? It just chips away. Everyone hypes it up. It's called the Gartner hype curve. And then, well, it didn't really work. And everyone goes back, told you it wouldn't, our customers would never. And then they reaffirm their assumptions and chips away. And then all of a sudden it starts to get critical mass and feeds on itself. And you wake up and in 36 months, you're in a Blockbuster-like situation. Now, I think Blockbuster is an extreme example, and I'll tell you why. Because for things like Kodak and Blockbuster that always get rolled out in these conversations, the net marginal cost of scaling digital content is how much? 0. You at least have the advantage that you deal in the real world where we make stuff and it's not all ones and zeros. So I don't think that's the kind of, I don't think it's that extreme, but that's the same phenomena that you'll see. Great example. One more. Someone's getting voluntold over here. You got voluntold, by the way. Thanks, man.
One of our ideas that we were talking about was the outdoor air monitoring product that KMC is introduced at the conference, and how that rolls into the IAQ question, and how that's always been an issue in our industry, but we didn't really have a tool to capture it.
Yeah, right.
And this is a technology tool to drive that equation forward with our customers and bring it to market.
Yeah, and I don't know the ins and outs of the tech and your business and what people really buy and don't buy, but it sounds to me like now would be a really good time to be pitching that to people, you know what I mean? Like, it's on people's mind, they're thinking about it, we have a lot of challenges in that space. Love it. We could do this for a whole day. We're not going to. I want to move you to the next idea. And the next idea, by the way, these are just slides that have summarized the things I've said. I'm going to give you I know some of you are taking photos. I'm more than happy for you to have the deck. I'm more than happy for you to have the video, whatever you need, all right? So unleashing ambition. Every now and then in my job, I get to meet someone I have no right to meet. And a number of years ago, I met a guy called Gary Kasparov. Do any of you know who Gary Kasparov is? Okay, dude played chess, was good. Right? Like, he's the guy that took on like IBM and did the whole Extreme Blue thing, blah, blah. In fact, he's so good he won 16 world championships, and halfway through he created his own competition with a new set of rules to make it a little more complicated and difficult. But I got like 3 minutes with this guy in a green room before going on stage, and I was like, you know, Dr. Kasparov, of all the world championships you won, which was the hardest one to win? I thought he'd say the first or the last. He said the third, which I considered a pretty random answer. I'm like, I mean, the third. And he's like, in my first year, he said, I was 20, I came out of nowhere. He said, I played fast, I played aggressive, which I thought sounded like an oxymoron when describing a game of chess. I was like, what, like you moved your pawns really quickly? Like threat? And he was like, no. But his strategy was aggressive. And he said it was quite new for people to play like that at chess. Like no one had really seen that before. And he said he won 12 games to 10, no one knew what hit him. He said he came back year 2, and he won again in year 2 with the same strategy, the same style of play. He said the problem was he had to work harder and harder and harder for a smaller and smaller margin of victory. Anyone, that sounds like business 101, right? Like work harder and harder for lower and lower margins, right? And he said that he knew that he could probably squeeze out a third win. But by that point, they would have studied every move, every pattern, every game. People would have figured it out. And he said they would have leapfrogged him, and leapfrogged, I know that's grammatically correct, and he would have had to spend the rest of his life trying to catch up, now being behind. And he said, I had to front run my competitors and reinvent myself before I needed to, because in order to be great and stay great, you have to be capable of escaping the gravity of your own success. I thought that was such a beautiful line. Capable of escaping the gravity of your own success. He said learning a new strategy, like figuring out the business model around that technology or figuring out the business model around digital services, not that hard. Unlearning the old way of selling and the old way of relating and the old way of servicing, way harder. And when you find yourself in a competitive selling situation, and maybe your buyer hasn't fully evolved into the new reality, and you're trying to sell them the solution you know they need, and the one that drives the right kind of revenue and the right kind of enterprise value for your organization, but you know it's probably just going to be easier to go back to a transactional model, you will feel literally sick in your stomach at times in a sales process like that. It's like this visceral pull taking you back to the old way. And it's not even the old way because it's still the way. It's just not the new future way. He said that was the hardest part. He said he'd feel like he was going to lose a game. And in that moment, he would let go of his new approach and go back to his safe comfort space. And so let's translate this. And by the way, this I think is your number one challenge. Because none of you are struggling for demand right now. Would that be a fair statement? If anything, the big issue is getting enough labor to fulfill the demand for most of you. And so why would you fix what ain't broke? Well, for a couple of reasons. Reason number one is all organizations, all industries, all businesses are subject to obsolescence or creative destruction, where over time you have to work harder and harder and harder for a smaller and smaller margin of victory. And you can keep squeezing and commoditizing yourself, and then you'll come to like the Genius Summit, you'll be sitting at the bar and go, do you remember the good old days? Blah, 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 you know? I mean, you'll survive, but you won't thrive. And you know, at a deeper level, you'll rob yourself of the opportunity to make a significant impact on your customer's life, the growth of your enterprise, and also, I would say, on society when you think about the sustainability pieces of well-run, highly predictive, analyzed, understood facility and physical environments, right? Like, at least you're positioned to have a positive impact on the world. So I talk about meeting some people that you never have a right to meet. Well, actually, about 2 months before the whole COVID lockdown, actually maybe 3, it was December 2019. I mean, New York City, it's 25 people, so it's basically 4 tables, right? It's the CEOs of the largest financial services companies in the world. Like, these are the masters of the universe, quote unquote. And the other speaker was Jeff Bezos, which is not a bad guy to get to speak. I mean, he'd recently gotten divorced, so he's probably seeking a little bit of extra cash, I don't know. But he's on the speaking circuit, right? He was, and it was because, like, you're talking the Jamie Dimons of the world, and like, he's just there to be in service. He's being interviewed by a Wall Street journalist, Journo, who then turns over to the audience and says, do you guys want to ask any questions? And a gentleman you've seen on the news plenty of times puts his hand up. This guy hasn't put his hand up to ask anyone a question since 3rd grade. He's like, Mr. Bezos, can I ask you a question? You know, hands up. How do you decide who you're going to disrupt next? And this little murmur goes on some other table. I don't care as long as banking's not next. You know? Like, he's like, he literally said, that's kind of a stupid question. And the audience was like, what? He's like, yeah, you all sit around thinking about what your competitor's doing, and if you can just beat them on price or give them one little bit slightly better service, you'll be fine. You know, in other words, your whole strategy is defending the status quo, doing the absolute minimum you can to differentiate, and just stay it slightly ahead of your peer set. He says, that's not why your organizations were started, and neither was mine. He says, he said, this is just a joke. People think we must have these war rooms in Seattle, where every industry has its own room, and we have a big scorecard up with red, yellow, green indicators, and when everything goes green, that's it, we're coming for you. And they're all like, that's exactly what we think happens at Amazon. Right? And he says, no. He says, we only ask 2 questions. We come to work every day and we ask 2 questions. Listen to these questions. Question number 1, where is our customer going? Question number 2, how do we beat them there? They're my favorite 2 strategic questions I think I've ever heard. Where is our customer going, and how can we beat them there? Because when you ask those 2 questions, you no longer say things like, but our customer's not asking for it yet. Because you have decided that you are going to lead, not follow, that you are going to take them into the future, that you're going to show them the convergence of technology and services and innovation and what is now possible for that space. And you're going to inspire them to make decisions that move them into the future rather than help them do just the basics with the status quo. And I think that's a really interesting model. And so what I thought I would talk about is, what are the things that currently, when organizations do, what are the domains in which you can kind of lead your customer into the future? Because it turns out we did a lot of research on this over the last 10 years, and they're basically what our research has told us is that there are 5 things driving that level of value, that level of differentiation. Okay? The first one is solving the higher order problem, right? That our clients have problems, but there are some problems they care about more. How well do you orient against the higher order problem? 2 is you're absorbing the complexity of this new integrated digital world rather than outsourcing that complexity to them. You understand user experience and interface and how do you make things easy. You sell on expertise, and now the flip side of selling expertise is the beautiful thing about doing that is you create confidence, so you minimize risk. So there's a couple of versions of what that looks like, and then purpose, values, etc. I'm going to focus on the first three. Let's focus on Nike as the example of the first one. What's the number one? Well, let me back up. When Nike was born, the number one challenge amateur athletes like you and I had was getting access to functional athletic equipment. That was literally, they were imported mostly from Japan, supply was not great, they weren't that functionally supportive. And so Nike basically made its money and carved out its space by creating high-performing functional stuff. And it's got them like, in basketball, 93% market share, for instance. How many of you are struggling to get access to functional athletic equipment and apparel? Is that a differentiated space, yes or no? No. So Nike moved to the next, what's the next higher order problem? Well, it's not just to have functional equipment, but do I feel and look good while I wear it? So fashion and brand and athlete endorsement. I want to be like Mike, Bo Jackson, right? Second question, any of you struggling to get access to athlete endorsed apparel these days? No longer a higher order problem. So they migrate from one competitive advantage to the next competitive advantage. Did you know that is the definition of the role of the management team? To migrate an organization from one competitive advantage to the next with the least amount of damage and the most amount of value created. So what would you say the number one challenge you face as an amateur athlete these days? What's our number one challenge? Doing it. Exactly, right? Think about it. People usually say time, but it's not time, it's motivation, right? Because what happens is, you come into Nashville, you know the weather's good, the JW's here, there's a couple of good running tracks. You committed to yourself when you flew in. I know. I'm going to run every day when I'm in Nashville, I'm going to do it. Then you had a margarita, you had another one, tequila shots were served, you headed down to Broadway, honky-tonk here, honky-tonk there. Your alarm went off at 7 a.m. this morning. You hit snooze, it went off again, you hit snooze, you slipped into mathematician mode and begun calculating the absolute last possible minute you could get out of bed and not miss Rick's opening remarks. Anyone familiar with this pattern of behavior, right? Well, what Nike's doing is they're trying to solve that problem, and they're trying to do it with Nike Plus, which is essentially a software layer on top of hardware that collects data and allows you to connect to people like you, the people you like, and people who are like you. And so what you do is you set a goal. I'm going to run 5Ks for the next 3 days, and you put it up, and 30 of your friends see it, and they like it, and they're like, good for you, Bill, you get after it, bro. And so now all of a sudden you've got accountability. And you would do more to avoid embarrassment in front of your friends than you'd ever do for yourself. But the good news is these days you can just walk outside, take a photo, put it on Instagram, did my 5Ks today, walk back inside, have some powdered eggs, and no one would know the difference. Except now, Nike put an accelerometer in your shoes, or they integrate with all the wearable technology that says, ba-bum, you walk like 35 steps so far, right? And so they're using data to help people understand just what they really are and are not getting up to. It's called Nike Plus. Actually, I would say the numbers today are probably over 300 million. I reckon, they haven't released it. The last time they released it officially was over 170 million members. I reckon it's probably over 300 now. By the way, if you are a member of Nike Plus, you spend 3 times more money with the brand than if you're not. Now, that is part correlation, not just causality, because obviously you're predisposed if you've signed up in the first place. But part of the reason is they set hundreds of millions of goals. I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to do this. Now, they've tracked 10 plus billion miles on this platform. If you run 10 billion miles, what are you going to need a lot of? Shoes. What the Michelin food guide is to tire usage 110 years ago is what Nike Plus is to running and working out. I don't know if you know that, but the Michelin food guide, like 3 hats and all that stuff, that was created by Michelin and Tire Company to encourage people to drive longer and longer distances for fun and recreation, because the longer people drove, the more tires they would use. It's a 110-year-old strategy, but basically it's positioning yourself against the higher order need, right? Yes, cost matters and efficiency matters, but deep down, what I want is a space that keeps people safe and healthy. Is environment. You're anchoring to, I want to be running highly efficient, low downtime, well-oiled machines, The higher order problem. Nike, by the way, has added 80% enterprise value in the last 3 years on the back of their digital technology, because what happened was when COVID happened, they had data on hundreds of millions of customers. And they could tell you exactly what they liked. And you know what else? They had a direct relationship with them, rather than having to go through retailers. And through COVID, they basically eliminated about a third of go-to-market channel partners, relied on their own stores and their website, and they're up from like $80 a share to $160 a share, or 145, I think, maybe today, as a result of their digital strategy. Phenomenal case study, right? Let me give you a second example. If I said to you 10 years ago, by the way, this example I think is really interesting for your business models. If I said to you 10 years ago, what does Adobe sell? What would your answer have been? Software in a box, like PDF readers, and Adobe Premiere and Photoshop. Question, how much did you pay for your most recent PDF reader? The actual Acrobat business is not really about PDFs, it's about document storage and cloud storage of e-commerce platforms and company documents, right? It's more about a document management, asset management business. Anyone use Instagram? How much did you pay for the insane editing technology that's on that device in your pocket? So their two core products were basically being commoditized to a price point of 0. And so they could have raced each other to the bottom. Oh, you can do that song in 3 notes, I'll name it in 2 notes, and just cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. Less money for innovation because there's no free cash flow, which means there's less differentiation, which means there's more about price. Keep running each other down. Or they could solve the higher order problem and absorb the complexity that went with it. Well, what was the higher order problem in marketing? What's the number one challenge marketing faces as a function? Is that we know we need it, because we really know that we have to market, and we know that half our marketing works. We just don't know which half. Think about that. We throw money at the wall because we know we have to, but we're never quite sure which bit's sticking. Well, e-commerce and an omni-channel world and data collection, their version of IoT basically, gives a level of transparency and accountability that you now can test and measure and test and measure. Because it turns out that higher order problem a marketer faces is not, can you make my assets, my images beautiful? It doesn't matter how pretty the image is. It matters that I show the right image to the right buyer in the right way at the right time so they transact. That's the actual job of marketing. And now we have this capability, and they could have avoided it, or they could have moved up the value chain and done it. Now, this is an incredibly complex thing to do, but they bought a company called Omniture that scrapes data from consumer behavior online and then changes the marketing mix to meet the patterns that exist within the unstructured data. In other words, a lot of analytics going on. If you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, have you ever searched for a pair of sneakers on the internet and then noticed those sneakers follow you around the internet for about 6 weeks? Have you noticed in the last 18 months that you could be having a conversation like this, and then all of a sudden in your feed, Facebook, on your Google searches, straight away you start seeing the very thing you were talking about. You didn't even plug. That's because none of you have changed the privacy setting on your phone. And they're collecting everything. Everything. It's gotten so good now, it's now even in your predictive search. I had a conversation on the phone yesterday, and then 3 minutes later, I was like, where do I find? And it knew what to put in. I didn't even give it a clue, and Google knew the answer. That's Adobe and Salesforce and one or two, and IBM and a couple of other companies that are driving that. Just so you know, when Adobe did this, they were selling, when Adobe begun this journey, they were selling $270 million a year worth of software in a box. Like they would make the software, put it on a disk, and sell it to you, and you could upgrade it whenever you felt like. 10 years in the future, 3 years in the future, your disk on-premise, on-device would work. They migrated that business to the cloud, and were basically like, it's going to be real-time, always up, always on, always upgrading. Their customers were so upset that 50,000 of them joined arms against the oppressor and started a petition against the upgrades. Talk about leading your customer into the future, huh? So that $270 million a year software business is now a subscription business, and their run rate's $6.5 billion a year. Because every marketer on the planet now wakes up and uses this Omniture-like technology to allow their marketing dollars to be more efficiently spent and to extract more value. So if you're using the complex, sophisticated analytics, you may as well use everything else they sell. I suspect that in your business in the future, you'll win the business by absorbing the complexity of creating a friction-free, integrated, predictive, smart set of building systems. And I bet you still make all the money doing the things you've always done. In other words, we'll win with the absorbed complexity of the higher order problem, most likely. And the margin may still be in the other parts. Maybe, I could be wrong. Ideally for you, the margin's in both. They were $18 a share when they started this journey. They're $650 today. In fact, they are top 10 performing stocks in the world, most likely in the last decade, by doing exactly the journey that is right in front of you right now. But there's one stock that's done even better. Let's imagine I'm your financial advisor. I'm not, so this comes with whatever disclosures it needs. I'm going to take you back to 2010, but you can know everything you know today. You literally can have all of the hindsight that you've got in 2021, but you can go back and make some investment decisions in 2010. Wouldn't that be the most amazing actual thing to happen? I wish, right? Anyway, and I give you the choice of buying any of the, but you can only buy one stock. So you've got to make a bet on one stock, but you know everything. You know what stocks have done well and what haven't. So you can buy Amazon, Netflix, Tesla, Apple, Facebook. Bitcoin actually probably would have been the best, right? Actually publicly traded equities, right? Or Domino's Pizza. Domino's Pizza would have been the transaction to make. 21 times increase in enterprise value in 7 years. By the way, in the last 4 years, they've gone from a 21 times increase in enterprise value to 131 times increase in enterprise value. They completely diminish the FANG stocks in return. Now, let's just think about it. 10 years ago, were the market dynamics of fast food pizza delivery conducive to rapid growth, do you think? No. The whole industry being 50% of the industry was controlled by 3 players, and they were already the second largest, so all the M&A, all the sophisticated capital. Was it price sensitive, yes or no? Damn right. You can do that pizza for $8.99. I'll do it for $7.99. I'll give you a gallon of Coke to wash it down. Yeah, and burn it off, right? What are the barriers to entry? Anyone with an Uber account and an oven can take you on. I mean, it's just not that. No one wanted to be in that business. And they created 131 times increase in enterprise value, and they were the second largest player in the space. That is an unbelievable, you know why? Because they got a new CEO who understood the power of accepting the new reality. First thing he did when he got the job is he ran a bunch of public campaigns apologizing to customers for making pizza that was disgusting. Do you remember those videos? He's like, this stuff tastes like cardboard, right? Inside story, he tried to kill that campaign the night before because he just freaked out. He's like, oh my God, we can't be that honest. He calls the head of the creative director of the agency. He's like, dude, you needed to tell me that 6 weeks ago. This is programmatic advertising. You've basically peed in a swimming pool. You're never getting it back, right? Like it's out there, you know? And it turns out to be like the most successful campaign in social media history. At the same time he's telling the honest truth and accepting that reality and promising to fix it, he's unleashing an ambition inside the business. He says, we might sell pizza, but we're not a food business. He says, we are a technology company because our value proposition is built on how do you create friction-free access to food. And there's no way to do that anymore without technology. And when I say like he became a technology business, 50% of the staff that work in the head office in Ann Arbor, Michigan, work 100% in technology. They're a damn pizza delivery. They got so good. You could literally tweet, hey, Domino's, I'm hungry. And they would cross-reference your Twitter account to their CRM and they'd activate an order. Turns out a lot of people got pizza they didn't actually want, but that's a story for another day. You can walk past your Alexa, hey Alexa, launch Domino's, hey Domino's, I'll take my usual. The total amount of friction required to order your pizza and solve your problem. You call your financial advisor. Ask him how much money you've got, what your returns are. He can't give you a straight answer. You call your building manager, ask them the quality and the state of the machines that run that building. See how well they answer that question. Domino's can tell you how hot your pizza is, whose car it's in, and exactly what time it's going to make it to your door. And you don't even need to ask them because you can just track it, open, in a stunning user interface on your phone. If they can do that in pizzas, could you imagine what we could do in buildings? 131 times increase in the value of their company in 10 years. And they were already the second largest player in the space. I could give you 100 more examples. The point I'm getting at is quite simply is there are certain things that drive value, expertise, purpose were the other two, where we get to lead our customer to the future. We get to be the front runner rather than be dragged there kicking and screaming. And the returns are absolutely there. So I'm not going to get you to answer this question because I want to check in on our time and how long we've got. But the question that I would have you, now, the truth will set you free. The question I would ponder is, are you slowing your customers' progress to an inevitable future, or are you accelerating that progress? Are you slowing their progress, or are you accelerating their progress? Because all the white space, all the differentiation is in the acceleration. All right, let me, Richard, how long have I got? Can I go 5? We'll go for 5 more? We just started a little late, so I'm trying to figure out exactly when you want me off. 5 more minutes, then I'll wrap up, all right? So I want to get to the final idea. It's the difference between agreement and alignment. Let me ask you a question. What's the hardest thing to do as a leader? Is it to define the strategy and the opportunity for the future, like the what? Or is it to get the people, the humans who work for you or who are in your value chain, they might not all work for you, they might be just part of the ecosystem. Or is it harder to define the what, the strategy, the vision, what it's going to look like, or to influence the behavior of the humans that you need to change in order to execute the strategy? Which one's harder? A little bit harder or a lot? Yeah, did you know 2 million Americans get open heart surgery a year? What percentage of the 2 million Americans who have their heart cracked open due to their lifestyle and behavior, what percentage do you think change their behavior post-surgery? It's 5 to 7%. 93% go back to exactly what they were doing before, which, by the way, leads to premature death. That's how hard human behavior is to change. And when you do a time and effort study of an executive team, when they're trying to transform their business, in other words, change fast enough internally to outpace their rate of change externally, when you actually do a time and effort, you find that most executives spend 90% of their time in the what, and only 10% of their time in influencing the people to do the how. That should be reversed. Because there is no change without behavior change. There is no transformation without behavior change. And so we need to shift our energy from what has to change, because I think that's the easy bit, and put it onto who has to change. And the most important thing to do, so did you just go far out? The most important thing to do, yeah, right. So, by the way, everyone knows another executive who's terrible at this, by the way, right? Everyone does. What do you think the most powerful thing in an organizational context, the most powerful thing to influence and change the behavior of other people? Like if you could pull any lever, push any button, what would you go after? Consistency, so like clear, defined expectations and accountability. Lead by example. By the way, the number one thing most CEOs do is they restructure the organization to change behavior. Have you noticed that in your career? The second most common thing to do is to change financial incentives. And yet more powerful than both of those two things is the behavior of the most senior team, because as goes your behavior, so goes theirs. I've known this for 20 years, and I couldn't do it myself somehow for at least the first 13 years as a CEO, right? So I was so bad. I remember it's probably about 8 years ago now, I'm back in Sydney, Australia. We had pretty big operations in Sydney and in Australia and New Zealand, and we're having a Christmas party, holiday party, right? And so I've flown back from Colorado. I'm jet lagged. It's the 23rd of December. It's 15 minutes to midnight. Everyone's drunk because they're Australians. That's kind of what they do. And I say to our COO, I'm like, when are these people going to leave? And she's like, these people? She's like, you mean the people that gave the last year of their life to manifesting your vision in reality? You mean those people? I'm like, fine. When's the team gonna leave? You know, we're a family around here, right? Come on. She says, they're only here because you're here. I said, that's ridiculous. I'm like, it's midnight. She's like, I said, I'm only here because they're here. She says, I bet you $50 if you leave, they'll follow. I'm like, that's ridiculous. There is no way they have any optics on what I'm up to at that point. I said, make it 100. So I bet her, this is so terrible to tell out loud, I can't believe I did. I bet my COO $100 that I could sneak out of the company Christmas party and no one would know and wouldn't follow. She takes the bet. It's like 15 minutes past midnight by the time we've negotiated our deal. I sneak down the fire escape. I'm like hiding behind couches. I hit, we're at Manly Beach, if you've ever been there. I'm walking along the Corso of Manly Beach. I turn around. There's like 50 plus people following me down the beach. I felt like the Pied Piper. It was the most uncomfortable experience of my life. On the 3rd of January, I get back to work. I say to Yvette, I'm like, hey, you were right. There's your $100. But hey, like people really notice my behavior. She's like, of course, you're like a senior leader in the business. You're the founder. In your case, like, of course they notice. I'm like, wow, I should be more thoughtful about how I show up. She's like, you think? I'm like, maybe I should get some feedback, just see how I'm doing. She's like, wait right there. She goes to her office, she comes back, she has a box. She starts reading me exit interviews. Love the company, hate the CEO. I'd still work at this place if it wasn't for Peter. Maybe we should do something about Peter. I think the place would be better without him. I own the thing. What are you talking about, you twat? I'm like, I said, she's just sitting there. She is keeping a stone cold face. I don't know how. I'm like, who gave me this feedback? She's like, I don't know. Looks like everyone to me. And I'm like, why don't they have the guts to stand up and give it to my face? She's like, well, sometimes you can be a little defensive. I'm like, I'm not defensive. People should have that. She said, the only way you're going to get it is if you ask for it anonymous. So we instigate. I say, how do I do that? She's like, you need anonymous feedback. I'm like, how do I do that? She says, wait right there. She has, by the way, this is a true story. She has been skimming the budget for 15 months, waiting for the day I came to the realization that my behavior was the biggest obstacle to our growth, when she could recommend executive coaching, AKA therapy, that's just more expensive, to work on my daddy issues so I could fix the way I showed up, like literally. She has prepaid it, so when it comes up, I can't say we're not spending that money. She's literally already paid for it. She was just banking me getting it one day. Anyway, long story short, we do the 360. It's all anonymous. All you need to know is this. Blue is good, empirically good. We know that if you have blue behaviors, there's 4 of them, you're driving highly productive, psychological safe workplaces, and profit is usually an outcome of those 2 things. You want absolutely no red under any circumstances, no matter how complex, no matter how much of a crisis you're in. Red destroys value. You can have a little bit of green if you run a large, complex organization, and we were in like 25 different cities, so we had a little bit of complexity, right? And so maybe a little bit of green. I'm going to show you my results. 25 million people have done this. I was in the worst 0.1% of senior leaders ever evaluated by their team. And man, I'm teaching this stuff, like, teacher heal thyself. So the first thing I did is say, I want to know who gave me this feedback. N equals everyone. And then I got into this, well, I don't care, look how successful we are. My coach says, could you imagine how successful you'd be if you weren't such a jerk? At which point I knew she was the right coach for me. Then I started to cry. Because this is my life's work. This basically says that my team think I'm on a different team to them. And we've been trying to push for innovation. We've been trying to get people to spend money like it was their money, not somebody else. Like all the things you want in a high growth, high performing. We couldn't pull it off. We were like plateaued. And once I stopped crying, she says, don't freak out. You only need to change 2 things. The most important one was the way I asked questions. Long story, super short. I asked questions like I'm giving a keynote. Why didn't you think of that? I'm like pushing people around. She's like, when you're one-on-one in an office, that doesn't feel like it does when you're in front of 5,000 people. She's like, back off, ask better questions. Like, why is now a good time to do this? What other options did we consider? Same questions, totally different experience. So I changed the way I asked questions, and that was my result 18 months later. Still pretty dysfunctional, but lots more blue, lot less red. We tripled in profitability between the left and the right. These initiatives that we couldn't get alignment around, all of a sudden people were on board with, and we didn't spend any more money, we didn't change the strategy, I just changed my behavior. Because as goes my behavior, so goes everybody else's experience of work, therefore as goes my behavior, so goes theirs. The most important lever to align when you're trying to transform an organization is to have the senior leaders begin to behave in a way that does two things. Represents the future of what you're trying to create, the way you engage with customers, what you sell, what you celebrate. And two, creates a very safe place for everyone else in the organization to take the risk of behaving in those same ways. And if they don't get a deal because they were trying to wrap it in digital solutions, which represents your future, you don't scold them for missing the deal, you celebrate them for taking the risk. When the pipeline's taking longer to move through because you're introducing new technologies that sit around that, you celebrate the courage they have to go after what the client really needs. Does that make sense? Because those behaviors are what will accelerate your rate of change and your progress to the future. So from me to you, thank you for having me. So good to be in person. To the KMC team, you guys are totally on fire right now with what's going on and positioned well. And I would say the last message I would have for you is when you think about aligning your organization, it's not just inside, it's also about who you choose to partner with. What kind of organizations, what kind of values, what kind of innovation do you want to be part of the way you go to market? And I think the decision to be in Nashville feels like it was a good one. Enjoy the rest of your day. Travel safe when you get home. Thanks for having me.